Okay, good morning, everyone. I think we are ready to make a start. All right. Okay, thank you for joining us today for our webinar on nature for health and well-being in prison environments. My name is Adrian Bodrement. I'm a senior research manager at CIRIA. Anyway, let's start with a little bit of introductions with regard to CIRIA. CIRIA stands for the Construction Industry Research and Information Association, and we are a not-for-profit member-based organization. Our goal is to improve performance of the construction industry, and to do so, we provide practitioners with guidance documents and also networking opportunities and learning events. We have about 80 plus members, and we're really proud to have members all the way from academic and also to the people actually doing the construction on the ground. So you can see here designers like the Arab, the Ecom, but also local authorities. It's great to also have um, departments, and we are trying to be the bridge between anything with regard to design and understanding the constructions all the way to implementation. CIRIA has been involved in the biodiversity theme for quite some time. You can see there that back in 2013, we've set up a biodiversity interest group. And when we did so, we actually started a biodiversity challenge, which has been transformed into an award cycle, which has been ongoing since 2014. We also published a guidance on biodiversity net gain, which was before any sorts of regulation or legislation on that topic. So it was the kind of the first thinking around this notion of bringing net gain into the biodiversity field. It was in collaboration with IMA and SAIM. And following this, we've also published a series of documents on that BNG topic, but also we have a dedicated guidance document on improving the performance of linear assets through green infrastructure. And most recently, when biodiversity net gain became mandatory, we've published a short guide, still with IMA and SAIM, to navigate through this new piece of legislation and who you need to talk to and everything that needs to be taken in account to have a successful BNG project. The BNG related documents are available for free on CIRIA website. So if you go to ciria.org and if you type in biodiversity net gain, you will find those documents. So feel free to download them and to take a look at these. A couple of years ago, we transformed the biodiversity interest group into a committee of practice. And the goal of that was to gather stakeholders and practitioners in the world of biodiversity all around and to have a chance to meet on a regular basis to discuss arising issues and potential solutions. But also, it's an opportunity for collaboration and knowledge transfer. So whenever we meet through with the group, we always have very interesting third-party presentations, and we try to highlight the opportunities that biodiversity can bring within the construction sector. We also talk about upcoming biodiversity policies, new ones or ones on the horizon, and it's an opportunity for members to exchange knowledge, lessons learned, etc., with their peers. We have organized this webinar today with this community of practice, and this is thanks to our members that we can have events like this today. So I'd like to just take a moment to recognize the support that we have from the organizations on screen. And this is really a very dynamic community, and we are looking forward to having even a bigger group next year. So if you're interested in joining this community, please send me an email or contact me. All right, but now it is time to dive into the topic of today. I realize now that we should have a housekeeping slide, but I didn't see it on screen. So I will just let you know that this webinar is recorded, and this is to allow the people that could not attend to actually listen to it at a later date. Also, you will see that there is a chat and a Q&A box. The chat is only for technical issues. So if you're having difficulties with the setup, this is where you can raise an issue, and we will try to help you out solving it. However, the Q&A is really where we hope to see a lot of interaction with you. So this is the opportunity for you to type in your questions. You can also like already existing questions, which help us in terms of prioritizing those, the order for which we're going to respond to those. So feel free to ask your questions. If you want to put your name, you can. You don't have to. If you want to direct your question to a specific speaker, you can do so as well, but you don't have to. And with that, I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to pass it on to our chair for today. And this is Sarah Harrison, and she's Program Director in Sustainability and Climate Change at the Ministry of Justice. Sarah, all yours.
Thanks, Adrian. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Harrison. As Adrian said, I'm the Programme Director for Environmental Sustainability in the, bit of a mouthful, but in the Climate Change and Sustainability Unit at the Ministry of Justice. I'm just going to apologise for my voice. I'm hoping it will hold, but it is a bit croaky, but bear with me. So what brings us together today? So I think there's a kind of strong and growing evidence that spending time in nature and green spaces plays an important role in improving mental and physical health, whilst also promoting social connection. So nature and green space are not what most people would probably immediately associate with secure environments such as prisons. However, it could also be argued that individuals living in these settings would benefit the most from having this sort of access. Offenders are disproportionately likely to come from disadvantaged backgrounds. They tend to have had traumatic experiences, and they face a myriad of challenges, including substance abuse and mental health issues. So there's a number of leading academics who are researching the impact of nature contact on prisoners' well-being. In many prisons, gardens typically serve as locations for work, with limited thought given to how the green space can be an opportunity for green social prescribing. Nature-based and environmental initiatives could, and at some sites they already do, provide therapeutic exercise, facilitation, rehabilitation, and they promote behavioural change, which can lower violence, reduce self-harm, and decrease assaults on staff. This green space opportunity is currently set against a significant prison expansion programme. At the moment, the Ministry of Justice has a big programme of work to create 14,000 new prison places across the prison estate. And that includes 3 new prisons, with 3 prisons already having been opened in recent years. This construction programme it's huge, and it's actively required the Ministry of Justice to consider its role in nature recovery, thinking about restoring, protecting and creating habitats, increasing woodlands, supporting pollinators and key species, and achieving biodiversity net gain on new build developments. So there is, at the moment, this great intersection between the MOJ, justice, health and nature recovery work. So it'll be really interesting today to hear the variety of perspectives that we've got lined up. So today's programme includes 4 presentations, followed by a panel discussion of Q&A. So today, the 4 presentations we have lined up for you. I'm delighted to be joined by Professor Dominique Moran, who's a professor in carceral geography at the University of Birmingham. We have Ben Mitchell, who's the principal ecologist at the Ministry of Justice. Emma Beniston, Regional Head of Operations, Northwest Secure Sites Spectrum Community Health CIC, and Beatrice Finch, who works as the HMPPS Offender Wellbeing Lead at HM Prison and Probation Service. So let's hear from our first speaker, Professor Dominique Moran, who will be presenting on the theme of the research perspective, positive impacts biodiversity and green spaces are having in UK, but prisons generally. Over to you, Dominique.
Thanks very much, Sarah, and thank you for the invitation to speak this morning. I think this is an absolutely critical topic, and it feels to me that we're at a bit of a turning point here in terms of our understanding of this challenge in relation to green spaces in prisons, and then some really, really exciting examples of how this is working in practice, which I know we're going to hear about later on in the seminar. So I'm going to begin kind of with the end point of my talk, which is to talk to you a bit about how we get to a point of having a set of design principles for prison landscapes, which are intended to support security, biodiversity, and well-being. And this is a piece of work that I've recently completed with the team of people there on the slide and in partnership with the organisations there on the slide. But before we get to that point, I'm going to take you back to first principles as to why we might be interested in this question. And I think, as Sarah has already said so well, we already know that there are all sorts of benefits to our well-being from contact with green spaces, and there's a huge amount of research which has already been completed on this topic in other institutional environments like hospitals and schools, where we know quite robustly that people recover better in clinical settings which have green spaces or views of green spaces in them, and we know that children do better at school where they have some kind of green environment near them. And common sense would say, I think, that the same effect is probably present in prisons, but until quite recently, the evidence base for this information to actually know for sure that these green spaces have this effect in prisons has been pretty thin. So my sort of scale, if you like, on the right hand side has been weighted a bit towards the operational evidence, which is absolutely there, that there are operational risks around green spaces, that contraband could be concealed in and that they could be weaponized in prisons and so on. There are legitimate concerns about how expensive these might be, and I think there are also some concerns about what the public might think about prisons which are, in inverted commas, too nice. I don't think prisons are ever that nice, but you might think that they're too nice if they have trees in them. And up to now, the only thing we've had to balance against those three important concerns is kind of common sense, that we just think that these things might be good. And I understand for policymakers who've got to make really important, expensive decisions about what prisons ought to be like, and Sarah's already spoken about the scale of the building programme that's underway. It's important to get these things right. I think there's been an understanding that we need really, really good evidence to back up conversations and to support decisions about what these spaces might be like. So the piece of research that I've been doing over the last few years has been looking at the amount of green space there is in already existing prisons in England and Wales, and it used geographical information systems to calculate the amount of green space inside the fence or wall, and it wasn't fooled by things like green tarmac or astroturf. This was real green space. And we put this green space information into a model that also controlled for all sorts of characteristics of these prisons: their size, the gender of their population, their security level of crowding, the age of these buildings, the ethnicity of the people in them and their age, if they were sentenced or not, and so on. There were some things, and those are the greyed out boxes, that we couldn't control for in the model, but which might be important. So as in all of these things, we can't control for absolutely everything, but we did control for as much as we could. And what we found when we analysed information which was a proxy for well-being, by which I mean in this context the presence of self-harm or violence inside prisons, and we also drew as well upon surveys conducted on incarcerated people in which they gave an indication of how safe they felt, or for example if they had developed a diverted medication problem whilst inside. When we analysed this information, we found that the effect of green space is significant and negative, which means in this context that having green space improves well-being. So we found, for example, lower levels of self-harm and violence in prisons which had more green space. And this effect was not affected by the other prison or prisoner characteristics that we included. So it didn't make any difference, for example, how big these prisons were, the security level of them, and so on. And it also didn't make any difference if we used the self-harm and violence information or those self-reports from the surveys. We found that, as you might expect, prison violence increases self-harm. So the more violent a prison is, the more self-harm we find going on there, unfortunately. So we know there are both direct and indirect effects. A direct effect of green space in bringing down self-harm, and then an indirect effect that as green space brings violence down, that in turn brings self-harm down as well. We looked at the effects also on staff. If I can move that slide on. Oh, gone too far, apologies. Go back one, try to. Yeah. We looked at the effect on staff as well, and we found that staff sickness absence was also lower where green spaces were bigger. And we also found that there's a relationship, again, as you might expect, between self-harm and violence amongst prisoners, and indeed violence towards staff, that where these are high, they also increase staff sickness absence. So again, there were direct and indirect effects, a direct effect of green space on staff well-being, and an indirect effect operating through the improvements to prisoner well-being, which then influence staff well-being as well. So what this means then is that for the first time during this research project, we were able to show that green space improves the well-being of prisoners and of staff based on national level quantitative data. And this was the first time that this kind of research had been completed. It supported the findings of previous research which had been done based on conversations with incarcerated people and staff at one or two prisons. So this wasn't a surprise, but it provided a robust evidence base that had, until we completed it, been lacking. And hopefully it serves to tip the balance a bit, so that people who are making those important calls about what our new prisons ought to be like have something else to weigh up against the operational evidence, the cost concerns, and so on, which might be stacked up contra to green spaces. So one of the questions that we always get asked at the end of talking about this research project is, what kind of green spaces ought these to be? What difference does it make if this is grass or trees or shrubs and so on? And that's a really, really tough question to answer. But what we did was we included biodiversity information in our model. So the information that we were able to include, we analysed our green space information in relation to data sets for biodiversity. Now, this wasn't as fine-grained a set of information as our own green space information was, so we have to exercise some caution here, but the results that we have show that the beneficial effects of green space on well-being that I've already been speaking about are greater where biodiversity is high, or, to put it a different way, better green space is better for us. And once again, I think this is a kind of common sense finding. We know, I think, on this call that this is clearly true, but until we did this piece of research, we hadn't been able to prove it. If you can move on again, please. Thank you. Our next step then was to try to put this research into practice, and this meant undertaking a joint research project in partnership with MOJ and CIRIA and the Scottish Prison Service as well, to produce some design principles which would indicate what kind of green spaces would be good and how to construct them, what these should consist of. And as you can see on the slide, I put together a team of people to work on this, and we also had the opportunity to visit lots of UK prisons and have a look at the green spaces they had, and also the opportunity to go to Victoria and have a look at what kind of green spaces they have there, obviously in a really different climate, but I think important to look at a correctional system which resembles ours in many ways. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what we've then completed at the end of this project is two sets of principles, one which is tailored exactly to the England and Wales context, the one in blue, and then one which is a bit more general, isn't particularly tailored to any one place, but sets out the same kind of principles and thinks about the ways in which they might take form, for example, in different climates, different biomes, and so on. And each one of them talks through the sort of underpinning research and how this might be put into practice, and really I think brings together all of the research, not just our own, but the wider body of research, and thinks through how that might be taken forward into practice and what these green spaces might be like. If we can go on to the next slide, please. So just to give you an indication of what this looks like inside, lots of diagrams, lots of illustrations about what kind of green spaces might work and why, so that if somebody's thinking about introducing some green spaces into the custodial environment, they've got a good set of sort of different options, different indications, different suggestions, things to think about and ways to think through how to introduce those green spaces in a way that's going to firstly be safe, and secondly, deliver the therapeutic benefits that we know that these green spaces can have. If we can go on to the last slide, please. From the research perspective, this was a really satisfying process, I think, to go through, in that it enabled us to close the loop a bit on the initial research findings and answer that, so what should we do next question in terms of what might these green spaces be like if we want to include them. It was great to be able to work on a big team that brought together international expertise and experience with our industry partners who know what the challenges are of bringing these green spaces into being, and of course policy makers who've got to make the important calls about what they need to do next. And hopefully what we've been able to do is increasing biodiversity in prisons, and hopefully with that the well-being of those who are both working and living in them. Our next steps in this work are firstly to undertake a study that one of my new PhD students is doing to look at the green views from prison cell windows and understand how much green view might support well-being, which obviously would have implications for how we introduce those green spaces in ways that they can be seen. And if anybody has a burning need to read the design principles in French, unfortunately, although I have a French name, I can't speak French, but a French translation for that is coming soon. So I think I'm up to the end of my time, and I'll stop there. And thanks a lot. And I look forward to any questions that you've got. Thank you.
Thanks, Dominique. And I can testify that the design principles is a brilliant read. It's really accessible. So I heartily recommend having a look at it. So let's hear from our next speaker, Ben Mitchell, who's the Principal Ecologist at the Ministry of Justice. So Ben is going to be talking to us about the government's perspective on the key design principles. And as Dominique flagged there, these design principles need to balance security, biodiversity, and prisoners' well-being. So no mean feat, but over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Sarah, and thanks to Adrian and the CIRIA team for putting this webinar on. It's great to be able to share some of the work that we've been doing, very much behind closed doors. 'Cause There we are. Perfect. So, as Sarah said, I am Ben Mitchell. I'm Principal Ecologist for the MOJ. So my job is, in this context, really to try and take the research that we've heard about from Dominique and try and turn that into practice, so to actually bring some change about. But before I talk about that, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit and kind of introduce the justice estate. It is a large government estate. It's a very diverse estate as well in terms of property types, building archetypes. And it's not just prisons, although this is quite a kind of prison-focused session, that we do also cover courts, approved premises, and all of the other kind of key components of the justice system. We do have 7 working prison farms. This includes a dairy herd and also a commercial sawmill. We also have a large industries portfolio within HMPPS. The prison service are reputedly the largest textile manufacturer in the UK, also producing a lot of wooden in-cell furniture. But we also have a fantastic horticultural team, and they are producing all sorts of agricultural products, as well as things like trees and wildflower plugs, which we are using in this context. And we have about 2,500 hectares of green space across the estate. There's also a lot of people involved in the justice system, whether that's people managing the justice system, delivering the justice system, or people who are part of the justice system. And you can see here some of the stats. These numbers have probably gone up since I actually pulled these numbers, because they are very fluid. But you can see from some of the photos here just the diversity of the estate, from central London. This is the Royal Courts of Justice down in the bottom left there, up to some of our rural estate and some of our fantastic historic buildings and agricultural land. Thank you. So why is ecology and nature important to the MOJ? Well, we have a number of external pressures or drivers, including the Environment Act, UK government greening government commitments, but also quite a broad and ever-changing suite of other legislative, political and scientific requirements that guide and determine how we manage the government estate. But also that the broader environment is changing, whether that's the political environment or whether that's actually the physical landscape or climate, is always in flux as well. And so we are also trying to use our estate to best enable and support our operational requirements. We've also had a new requirement recently to deliver biodiversity net gain, and this applies to the majority of our major construction projects. So that brings another interesting twist in terms of the use of land and the delivery of nature. And we also share a government ambition to support nature recovery, and it's our ambition within the MOJ to lead the way in greening government. Why is ecology important to the MOJ for ourselves? Well, in prison context, actually, nature provides opportunities to reduce reoffending. Reoffending is an extraordinarily expensive and difficult challenge for us as a society. And nature and green spaces provide opportunities for education, employment, purposeful activity. And when people interact with green spaces, we know inherently as animals ourselves that interacting with green spaces makes us feel good. There's also opportunities to improve staff wellbeing through the provision of high quality biodiverse green spaces. These are also workspaces for people. And it's often easy to forget that as well. and they are challenging places to work. And so whilst delivering green spaces and high quality green spaces isn't going to solve all of the inherent challenges, we have a duty to do what we can to support staff and to support prisoners on their transition as well. We also have a lot of pressure on the existing prison capacity, and so we are doing a lot of prison expansion at the moment. And actually, how we can demonstrate the effectiveness of our stewardship of our estate for nature facilitates that prison expansion, even though that feels counterintuitive. And it works in a variety of different ways, whether that's looking at planning decisions about new prisons, or whether it's actually about the legislative setting for some of the development rights and the way that we can develop prisons. We have a variety of tools of the trade. We have policy and strategy, which guide how the organisation acts, and also guides how the organisation acts when we are not directly involved, which is very useful. But it also sets the direction for us as a collective. We then have pieces of guidance which are useful information for our practitioners, for our designers, for our contractors who are trying to design something which we as a client want and find acceptable. We have a variety of contracts, whether that's with private prison operators or with various elements of our supply chain, including the people who build prisons for us, people who maintain and run prisons for us. And then I was always brought up to always take some biscuits wherever you are going to somebody else's house. And I use exactly that same approach every time I go to a prison. That actually, it always amazes me the amount that you can achieve over a cup of tea and a plate of biscuits. So our nature recovery plan, we were the first department in government to produce a nature recovery plan, and we're very proud of that fact. And it went from 2021 to 2025, and it really set the strategy as to how we are going to make a meaningful contribution towards the UK's biodiversity that enables our operational outcomes. And those targets are in the centre there. We split them into 9 overarching plan principles. And this is the overarching document out of which most of our work plans, they come out of that plan. And we are in the final processes of getting our nature strategy, which is the next evolution of our nature recovery plan, which will cover 25 to 30 in the coming months. So this slide summarises a kind of personal journey of mine, because when I started as an ecologist, you're then charged with managing a large government estate, and as an ecologist, you are taught about bigger, better, more joined up, and so the main opportunity value for nature is what we call outside the wire. You can see in the centre here, this is a map showing actually 3 prisons. But you can see there's obviously a very stark delineation between the main operational envelope of a prison inside the wire and outside the wire, which is our estate that is the setting for those operational sites. And outside the wire, the ecological value is very high, well connected. areas are large, the habitats are more valuable. So actually, fantastic, they're brilliant. Let's work on those. But actually, the value to people is very low. Typically, we don't really like people wandering about outside prisons. And actually, a lot of these areas are not really that accessible to staff either, because staff go in and out of one entrance. There's a car park, and actually, on a typical lunch break, you can only really walk for a small distance around the car park. So a lot of these areas are actually effectively kind of inaccessible to a lot of people. And what I realised from reading Dominic's research, and also just talking to staff, prisoners, people within our system, that actually the value of ecology and of habitats and green spaces inside the wire, but also in close proximity to courts, for example, or gardens within approved premises, are of extraordinarily high value to individuals. And that was a kind of penny dropping moment for me, really, that I didn't expect. And it's one of the things that I really enjoy about this job, is actually it challenges perspectives on an almost daily basis. So with that in mind, there's really two parallel approaches. So we have our estate management, which is similar to any kind of rural estate management, including a lot of productive agricultural land. But inside prisons is where the real challenge is. From a perspective of security is very difficult, affordability is very difficult. Doing anything in prisons is really very complicated and very difficult, and therefore very costly. So we have developed the design principles that Dominic has talked about earlier, which is a fantastic piece of work. And what we have done with that is we have now taken it through the prison service change management system, which is an internal system which then takes pieces of change, ultimately legislation and guidance, and formalizes those into internal processes. So it's fantastic to be able to take a piece of research-led work like that that's now turned into the design principles and is now then going to be hardwired into HMPPS processes, which is fantastic. And also this will affect how we design future green spaces as well, because of that. So whether it's future green spaces in new prisons or future green spaces in existing prisons, actually it applies to both, which is fantastic. So I'll skip through this, but this is the mitigation hierarchy framework that we use. And ultimately, this is how we protect the green spaces that we have, and also how we either enhance other green spaces to compensate for losses, or ultimately how we enhance green spaces and improve biodiversity to make our contribution towards wider nature recovery. So this includes things like the creation of wildlife features, tree planting, and you'll notice as it goes from left to right, the tools that apply and carry most weight in each one of those circumstances as you go towards the actual delivery basically increases in calorific value at the same time. So one of the other things that we do is we celebrate examples of best practice. And that's a very grand way of saying that actually we just really want to take the fantastic work that our frontline staff are doing and try and then apply that. And we want to try and amplify that across the estate. And there are some absolutely fantastic projects that people do. And this is largely off the sweat of their own backs. They come up with an idea and they don't know what to do. And at that point, hopefully they come to us or they go to B and they say, I've got a great idea. how on earth do I do this? And that's where our role, plus the role of the design principles document, that comes in, because it can then help them to design something which gets the best value for their prison and their particular bit of green space. So an example here is HMP Eastwood Park, and actually I visited Eastwood Park quite early in my stay here at the MOJ, and the governor there is absolutely fantastic. And her vision was really one of rehabilitation and using the green spaces that are around the prison to maximum effect. She also found that having specific biodiversity spaces doesn't really work, and that biodiversity should be everywhere. Clearly, as an ecologist, I firmly agree with that. But that people should just experience it as they are moving from A to B around the facility. So it's a very much passive, unavoidable delight that people can have with that glancing encounter. And the site management is absolutely superb. The instructor that's there works with a team of women to manage the site, and he does a fantastic job. So we've taken examples that of his work, and as part of his legacy, really taken that and tried to translate that into ways that other people can learn from. We're also looking at low nutrient construction waste as topsoil. The area of grass on here is actually construction waste, which is brilliant, but it's very low fertility, which lends itself very well to diverse grassland habitats. So we're looking at actually how we can incorporate that into new prison design by retaining subsoil and bedrock that we extract from that process. And we've also taken our biodiversity special interest group. So this is a group of our contractors who build and design prisons to these sites so that they can actually see what is possible on operational prisons. And here's a photo of Gary's handiwork here. And here we see, I mean, this is absolutely fantastic. It's low nutrient topsoil. Because it's low nutrient, the grass stays quite short and takes a much longer to grow. And so there's a security risk from having longer grass, but I love this photo because it demonstrates that actually we can do something for pollinators and biodiversity in a way which doesn't actually challenge the security requirements of the setting. So it is possible, and part of my job is actually finding those real world examples where people have done great things within prisons and learning from that and sharing that. And that's me. Thank you very much for listening. And yeah, I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Ben. Great to see those examples of some innovation there, even though they're in prison settings. It's always quite magical, actually, to see what can happen in prisons. Our next speaker then is Emma Beniston from the Spectrum Community Health CIC. Emma's going to be sharing a case study with us. Are you there, Emma?
Hello.
Oh, yes, you're there.
Hello, thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. So thank you for all being here today, and I'm delighted to share the Seeds of Hope project. The Seeds of Hope project, sorry, I forgot that I was doing the slides. This is a nurse-led project, and it is being delivered by Spectrum Community Health at HMP style, which I'm leading the project, and I've also designed the project. It's also being supported by the Queen's Community Institute of Nursing via the LC-WAG scholarship. There is 5 available scholarships nationally, and I was very privileged to be successful in gaining £5,000 to support with supporting the social prescribing pathway and also co-producing 2 gardens across the secure site. So the Seeds of Hope project uses horticulture as a social prescribing pathway to support women's health and wellbeing at HMP style. And this approach blends healthcare, therapeutic practice and purposeful activity to create meaningful change in a secure environment. So when we look at the research available, there's a plethora of research and data that demonstrates the inequalities that vulnerable people face in relation to their health. This is especially emphasised for women. In women's secure estates, over 90% of women arrive with primary care level anxiety or depression. Many also experience chronic pain, trauma, and menopause symptoms. Traditional clinical settings alone can't meet such complex needs, and we need to find approaches that consider emotional safety, agency, and connection. So, in a secure setting, the term agency refers to a person's sense of control, choice, and ability to influence their own environment in daily life. When we look at the traditional prison, it's very much a Victorian, usually, prison, or a prison that was traditionally designed for males, and as we've just heard, very limited green space. The restricted regime alone takes away the sense of control of a patient's own environment. So in prisons, agency of a patient is often limited. Routines are fixed, choices are restricted, and the environment can feel disempowering. So the Seeds of Hope project, by using horticulture, creates a salutogenic environment. Salutogenics is a creation of health. This in turn builds patient empowerment and ownership of a space, whilst being supported by healthcare and prison partners to also build competence and capability, not only through skills, but also through health literacy. So the Seeds of Hope project, the aim of this project is to embed a structured horticulture programme as part of a social prescribing pathway. The objectives are to improve mental and physical health and well-being, reduce the need for dependent forming medications, and to create a therapeutic environment that supports positive connections, reflection, and emotional regulation for our patients. Whilst doing this project, there's also been further potentials and benefits realised. For example, we're seeing an increased ageing population within our secure estates. So for social isolation that we often see in our ageing population, getting out into the green space, or even bringing green space indoors by finger planting and eating cafes for our older ageing population, which is often accompanied by our dementia pathway, it absolutely brings benefits to that population also. So how does the pathway work? The social prescribing pathway works by referring patients who attend the GP with low-level anxiety and depression into a 12-week programme. We've got 3 greenhouses at the site, which have been designated by the horticulture governor to healthcare for patients to access these for planting. The activities within these greenhouses will include growing flowers, vegetables, and engaging in mindfulness nature-based activity tasks. And that's also supported by our GP, who has a keen interest in the holistic health of patients. So this pathway isn't just gardening, it's an opportunity to build self-worth and give patients something purposeful to focus on. Supported by our health promotion leads, it will also include health promotion and screening opportunities. So the evidence of need is extremely strong, and linking access to green space with reduced anxiety, healthier coping strategies, and improved activity levels for women who often arrive with trauma histories. The nature provides a non-clinical, gentle route into recovery. The approach also aligns with national and World Health Organization priorities like the Core 20+5, and also with the wider women's health strategy. We recently started the work on the co-produced garden at HMP style, and this was based on the incentivised substance-free living unit, which was an excellent piece of work and is ongoing. And this garden has been designed by the patients who reside on that unit. And it was absolutely fascinating what that day brought. It was completely unexpected for me, just how valuable that day will be. And we had ordered and all the paints for the fences, the plants, the topsoil, and we also ordered 3 greenhouses so the ladies could grow their own vegetables for the unit. Now, on that day, working outside of that clinical environment as a nurse that I am, I replaced my tunics, my usual healthcare tunics, for green wellies and the Seeds of Hope project top that we all wore on that day. And we started to have conversations while painting the fences around patients' journeys. And these conversations were so much more enriched than the usual clinical environment. It really allowed women to connect with myself as a healthcare professional on a much more therapeutic level. And what it actually did was allowed us to highlight a gap. A lot of the ladies, for example, at HMP Style have a history of sex work, and they spoke about the lack of support. There's nothing that identifies sex workers. And it was really fantastic that I could take that information, and I'm now working with community services to bridge that gap. So it's just things that come out from these conversations outside of the usual clinical environment. It was also really interesting that the power of nature, we often think along the social determinants of health, you know, housing, education, employment, that when women come to prison, that it's often misaligned with what good social determinants of health look like. But actually working on this project, it's allowed me to realise, and speaking with women, that what prisons and secure settings actually do is provide a real nourishing community. Patients interact with the peers within these horticultural activities. And one of them said, it's so important that we have other partners linking in on these activities, because when we leave the prison, we go back to the same poor social determinants of health that we were exposed to before. So that was actually a new perspective for me, to actually understand that what we're doing for our patients, particularly the women in prisons, is very beneficial to the health. And how do we look at that from a revolving door perspective to be able to extend these social prescribing pathways on continuity of care upon release and through the gate? So that's something, again, that has come from this project. So we have really got an opportunity to transform not only the environment into a restorative and supportive health environment, but we've also got the chance to empower the women upon release to really get the right partners involved, and to give them health literacy and the skills and self-worth that will benefit them well. So our innovation with this project lies in creating the first fully health-led horticultural pathway embedded directly within a women's prison. And it isn't just about gardening, it's about using outdoor spaces intentionally and co-designing gardens with women themselves, so the environment becomes an active partner in their care. Ultimately, this model moves care from harm to hope for our ladies, creating a restorative community that transforms how they are supported and rehabilitated. So, design implications. There are, of course, many barriers that need to be collaboratively addressed with our prison partners. Many of the barriers come around the security interface that exists within secure environments. So, for example, this project had to have a lot of planning and conversation with our stakeholders. We have to use plastic tools, for example, have safe storage for our tools to be put away when out of core regime, for example. And of course, one of the main things that came out is the security risk. So within remand estates, and this is across female and male estates, within remand estates, when patients come into a prison, they are automatically placed on a high risk status, which means activities, predominantly horticulture, are not accessible to these patients. So a lot of work has been done to break down them barriers, which in turn begs the question, I suppose, around purposeful activity. We often look at purposeful activity as work, education, but we really need to be able to offer horticulture as purposeful activity in the terms of rehabilitation and recovery and reoffending, and understand how we overcome these hurdles. And I think this project has allowed us to highlight how, for example, in the remand environment, patients are not required to work. So, but a lot of them do want to access the outdoor space, because women reported they were waiting for sentences and they needed to focus on that. They needed to keep the family strong while they were in prison, and they were dealing with a lot of psychological impacts from coming to the prison environment. So actually for women, purposeful activity in the terms of horticulture is so important. So to get over that hurdle, we work to, for example, get them on a short course of education, which then would inherently lower the risk because they would show that they were attending, and this attendance to activity would then decrease the risk, and they would then be allowed onto the horticulture programme. We also had to risk assess the plants to make sure that all plants were safe. There was no ingestible, poisonous plants. There was no thick vines that could be used for ligature, for example. So there is a lot of barriers that need to be planned for carefully. One of the main positive outcomes is that on the incentivised substance-free living unit, the ladies couldn't access the outdoor space at the weekend because of the regime. So the security governor worked with myself and the drug strategy lead to put a lock on the gate, and this was completely, life-changing, I'd say, for the ladies, who were then able to go to the greenhouses at the weekend, watch the plants grow, nurture the plants, and look after the garden that's being designed. So sustainability and future integration. So horticulture in prisons is generally goop based, so greener on the outside of prisons project, and horticulture governors will use webwebs and report a quarterly report to the goop professor in the Northwest. That's Michelle Baybutt, who is professor of goop. And so for this project, I'm working with Spectrum Community Health's social prescribing lead to identify what metrics we can collect from a health perspective to really demonstrate how this has improved mental health and well-being, the prescribing of first-line antidepressants and the reduction in that, because instead of that we're offering access to outdoor space as a first-line treatment, but also recovery. So we're outlining metrics to really be able to demonstrate how this is beneficial to health, which is something we're very excited to do. How do we replicate this in other environments? It's very difficult to have a model that you can replicate because of the such differences within the green space available. So, for example, we need to understand how horticulture can be brought indoors. We have identified space for a wellbeing cafe, which will allow ladies to become involved in finger planting and take the plants back to the cell, to the room, and be able to watch and nurture that plant grow, which has been excellent and something that's not happened before within the prison estate. In terms of the design of prison environments, we have a lot of Victorian designs, and I think the purpose of prisons when them Victorian designs were created was very different to the recovery and rehabilitation focus and reducing reoffending focus that we have today. So going back to salutogenics, it's how we create health, it's how we integrate systems, OM, offender management units, probation, health, and the whole other systems, education, work within the prison, to be able to create them systems that allow the creation of health for our patients to be able to recover and to get the most out of the time in prison. So I think that's me, Sarah.
Thanks, Emma. It's really interesting to hear about the specific work you've been doing at HMP Style. Thanks for that. So I think we're moving to the final presentation of the day, which is from Beatrice Finch, who is the HMPPS Offender Wellbeing Lead from HM Prison and Probation Service. And B, I think you're going to be doing the prison service perspective. So the impact of nature-based interventions on offenders' health and wellbeing, behaviour and rehabilitation. So over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Sorry, apologies for the very long title. You had to get your word around. Hello, everybody. So yeah, I'm Beatrice Finch. I work in head office in HMPPS in offender wellbeing, but my background is ecology and green space. And I've been working probably about 15-ish years, although I haven't actually counted, in that field. So I'm very aware that I have the graveyard shift of this webinar, and it's nearly lunchtime. So what I wanted to do was bring about a few more stories to sort of highlight just the impact that this kind of work has on the people. It's very easy to get sort of caught up in, in stats and numbers, but yeah, I think the story is the bit that's really, really hits home and just goes to show how important this work really is. So yeah, just the power of a story. The tiny little impacts that we quite often take for granted, like finding a moth or something like that, can have a phenomenal impact on a prisoner. If you imagine being stuck in a room for 23 hours a day and you get let out for 1 hour a day, and in that hour you manage to go onto the gardens team and you're part of the gardens crew and you find a moth that you've never seen before. I mean, I'm putting this in very simplistic terms, but actually that is a massive, massive deal. And I think, yeah, we just to sort of bring it home and how important that is. Could you move me on, Charlotte? So I wanted to start off talking a bit about our Nature and People Awards. So this is organised by Sarah's team through head office, but I think we do it almost every year. And it's an internal awards programme that has been running again for about 15 years. And I was part of it when I was in Sarah's team. Every year, I'm absolutely bowled over by the applications that we get through, and just like Ben said, the ingenuity of what is happening in prisons with the limited resources they have, and just what is going on. It just gives you a little insight into just the amazing things. So I wanted to give you a couple of quotes. These are from prisoners that put when the applications came in. So first off, during lockdown, we were very scared and spent a long time in our cells. I grew 2 apple trees from pips in my apples. The governor saw them and asked how I managed to do it. I asked if he would take them and look after them, as the cups I had were too small, and he did. So this just really hits home about the tiny acts that can have a really big impact. So not only has this prisoner been able to nurture something and see it grow, but also this interaction with the governor, and then it sort of creates something to talk about that's a really nice thing. So it's just a really small act that becomes a really, really big deal. And then secondly, it helps me to get a lot off my mind. I like doing work outdoors, and it feels and really felt this was a good way to get my mind off stuff. When I'm in the garden, I really feel like I can get stuck in and forget about other stuff. It's like I'm meditating. So this, again, really big impact in that being in a prison and being able to get completely absorbed in a project and being in and around nature just has, again, a really big impact. Can you move on, please? So I didn't want to miss out the staff. It's very easy to talk again about the impact that nature-based interventions have on prisoners, but a lot of people work in these prisons, and we are all human beings, and so we all matter. So yeah, this has this knock-on effect. The first quote really does stand out for me. So, to stand in an area within a prison that just doesn't feel like a prison is an extraordinary feat. Prisoners and staff truly appreciate this little bit of beauty that sits within the prison walls, and that can never be underestimated. And secondly, we created our first wildflower meadow. Escaping the emails and walking around the gardens was so good for reconnecting with nature. I think, take it for granted that we are asking a lot, a phenomenal amount of our prison staff. They are not only need to come to work, but they also have to look after these prisoners. So this looking after each other's well-being and using this green space is actually, it's not just for this type of person, it's for every person. I think it's just a really important fact. If we could move on, please. Okay, so Emma talked a bit about Goop. I'm also going to use some of the quotes from the Goop project, the Greener on the Outside of Prisons. I've been involved in this project for years now. It very closely aligns with the work that I do in offender wellbeing. And it's, again, an amazing project that has just takes that small act of getting outside and doing work with nature outdoors and realizes the importance of it. And I'm going to, when the slides get sent out, I can send out the research papers, but I just wanted to pull out the people aspect of it and read you some quotes. I think it was sort of December time. My mental health got really bad. I had to go back on my tablets. I couldn't go to work. I was working inside at this point. And for about 4 or 5 months, I couldn't get out of bed. It was really bad. I haven't had it this bad for a long time. And the only thing that helped me was coming to the gardens. It sounds like a bit of a kiss-ass or cliche, but I know that it helps me. But if the healthcare staff didn't have that information to start with, then you might not know that being outside actually helps. We move on to the next one, please. And these are some quotes from category C men's prisons. I will also add the photos I've put in here are all of inside prisons. So this is all a little insight into what it looks like inside some of these prisons. I just chill out here. If I'm stressing, getting anxious, whatever's going on in your head, you can escape. My default escape is I can just come out myself. All I can hear is nature, the grass rustling, the grasshoppers making a noise, the birds tweeting, natural, normal sounds of life. And that is so healing. And then secondly, going back to your cell, you don't notice at the time, but after doing Goop work, you go back to the wing in a better mood. It's a feeling of freedom, a feeling of being yourself instead of just depressed. We'll move on to the next one, please. And these are quotes from young offenders prisons that Goop's part of. You are right what you say about the environment. We're the only people that can fix the thing having broken it. And so it doesn't matter. And if you can make people aware, that's what it's done for me. I've recently been talking about ROTL, and that's release on temporary licence, where prisoners get released to do work, about what things I wanted to do. And one of the things I asked about is, could I be picked up at the gate by my wife? And can we put down that we're going to climb that hill over there? I want to go up there. I want to see what those things are growing up there and see if it's any different to here. And I think that quote just, that one really made me smile, because it was just that's evidence of the work that they're doing in the prison on the gardens has sparked something to say, actually, I now have this inside me that I want to know about what's growing. I want to go and see on that hill over there that something else is growing over there. So yeah, that one really made me smile. If we can move on, please. This is from the Women's Prison Group. I tell you now, I wish I'd done all of this at school because it's been the making of me. I absolutely love it. Because it's like when you put a seed in the soil and then you watch it, and it's like you're growing with that seed. And we didn't pay these people to say these things. That one's absolute gold, isn't it? It's just like getting away from everything. And it's like sometimes I don't even see that fence because I don't even see it. To me, most of the time, I forget where I am. Now that, again, that links back to the staff quote that if you can make it so good inside a prison that people can forget that they're in prison, then you've absolutely nailed it. And lastly, I used to be a prolific self-harmer. And in the last 8 to 9 years, I don't self-harm no more. And this is a lady who, for the last 8 to 9 years, had been part of the gardens team. So yeah, just goes to show how much of an impact it has. Can we go on to the next one, please? Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about ponds. I won't go too geeky on you because I could talk about ponds a lot because I absolutely love them. But ponds in prisons have just such a really big impact. I've been in part of many pond creation projects in many prisons. But what started off as something that was actually really good for wildlife, because ponds are definitely the best thing you can do for wildlife, quickly became a project that actually not only enhances the site for everybody to look at, but creates a focal point for people to go and I'll meet you by the pond, or they'll go and talk by the pond or have a meeting by the pond. But also this interest arises in what can you find in the pond, and then you can learn about nature. So there are just so many benefits to ponds. And I think the difficulty that we have with ponds is obviously when you're in a big open prison, it's very easy to find a piece of land that you can dig a pond in. But there are a lot of urban prisons. Other people have talked about the Victorian prisons, and I've worked in one, so I know how ridiculously cramped they are. But the MOJ team have been sending out raised ponds recently, and I'm not sure on the numbers that have been sent out, but these have gone down really well because they are built by the prisoners and they are instant impact and just a really amazing thing. And just a really small thing that can become a really big thing. So yeah, I'm a complete advocate for ponds anywhere. Okay, if we can move on, please. And then lastly, I wanted to talk a bit about No Mow May, or wildflowers and meadows. So Ben spoke a bit about this, and I think everybody actually spoke about this. The issues of wildflowers and wild places in prisons that we come across with security, and the fact that it's used as sort of a place for people to hide things. But these photos go back to what I said at the beginning. The ingenuity of people in prisons bowls me over. So this is their compromise of saying to the security department, no, we want to have some wildflowers, but we're going to do it in a controlled way so that it's not all taking over and is counterintuitive for security reasons. But this is a way of saying, look, we want to enhance our site for wildlife. We want to have these interest areas so that people can learn about wildflowers and all the invertebrates that come. But we also realise that we're a prison. So it's just a really beautiful image, I think, and a really good way of summing up just the fantastic work that can happen in a prison. And that's me. So thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Bea. It's really interesting to hear some of those bits of feedback from both staff and prisoners on the work that's going on across a range of different prisons. So that's the presentations over with. We're now going to go into the Q&A session. So could I just invite all the speakers to turn on their microphones and webcams again? I can see that we've got at least 7 questions. For anyone else who's listening, now's your chance to add in some questions if you haven't already. There is a function where I think you can put a thumbs up if there's particular questions that people want to hear answers to, but hopefully we'll have time for the 7 that are there anyway. So where should we go to? Should we go? We'll go down, as there's no thumbs at the moment. We'll just go down one by one, I think. So question number 1 was about really great outcomes on reducing violence. Did you get feedback on the other issues that you were initially concerned about, like sightlines, contraband, cost and risk? I think that question might have come up during, was it your presentation, Dominique?
I think so. I think so. Yeah. So I think it's important to say that the study that I'm talking about was something that was desk-based. So it was actually done during COVID, and and this perhaps relates to a couple of the other questions down there in the Q&A, that it was done entirely based on information that we as academic researchers could get hold of outside of MOJ. So it was purely based on the published information that MOJ puts out there in relation to self-harm and violence and so on, and also took the published data on the capacity of the different prisons and so on. So in that particular study, we weren't looking specifically at those particular security concerns and so on as they might exist in the individual prisons which were part of the study. However, in prior research, I have had very long conversations with prison staff about the concerns that they have and the things they are worried about taking place in relation to these green spaces. And I've heard lots of examples of things which have not gone as well as perhaps they might have done. So I think that's why we're really concerned in the design principles to take those concerns seriously and think really carefully about some of the things that Emma was talking about what kind of plants should these be, what sort of things should we not have, what are the risks, and how can we minimize those as far as we can. But I think it's also important to point out that what we also learned as part of that process is that we can think about green spaces as more than just a security risk. I think we can also find some really good examples of the ways in which green spaces actually work to improve security. And I don't just mean by reducing stress and perhaps reducing the kind of impetus for violence or self-harm, but in much more subtle ways to kind of screen things that we don't want to be visible, but in a less harsh way than fences or kind of steel sheeting or whatever. We can also use them to impede the passage of drones where that's a problem. And we can also use sort of green planting and shaping of landscapes to direct people to kind of move around the prison site in the way that we'd like them to minimise risks. So I think it's important to think about green spaces in a range of different ways.
I think as well, some of that engagement with the security people as well seems to work at certain sites. So early engagement about what projects are trying to do, understand what the security implications and what their concerns are, has also been successful, so that it, working together to try and identify what it is we're trying to stop or promote.
Absolutely.
Did any of the other panel members want to come in on that point around sightlines, contraband, cost and risk?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I really just to kind of highlight the process that the design principles document has gone through within the MOJ. So one of the important partners internally is our technical standards team, and they're fantastic, and they are the ones that are constantly evolving and pushing at the constraints of prison design, looking at the application of new technologies, trying to keep up with new technologies, trying to resist novel technologies in terms of security, all of that kind of thing, looking at ways to deliver prisons and prison expansions more cost effectively. And so they were a key consultee with us. So it's very much been kind of co-designed with them. So whilst they are not necessarily security governors on a site and can't really speak to exact sight lines and how something might actually function in any given site, they are the ones who kind of govern the standards to which prisons are constructed. And so it was great to have that dialogue with them to be able to test exactly those things. So those design principles are actually the product of that conversation. So when I mentioned the fact that it's going through our kind of change management system, those are the kind of questions that come back up, because that's going through the HMPPS senior management chain as part of that consultation exercise. So as yet, it's not really been subject to that much pushback, because I kind of feel like we've done the homework, you know, and it'll be really interesting to see as those principles start turning into actual green spaces, how those manifest themselves. The principles as well, we veered away, we changed path, didn't we, Dominic? That what we were trying to do initially was to have a kind of very prescriptive set of principles, but that was going to come into conflict with a lot of different standards and different people's kind of opinions and perspectives. So what we've done is actually the principles are checklists to make sure that the design is fully consulted, considers all of the different parameters and constraints and opportunities that exist on a specific site. So it's much more of a thought and kind of like design process guiding document than it is to say you must build this fence to this height and this bench out of this stuff. It doesn't do that prescriptive element. So that's how it kind of interacts with those security constraints, if that makes any sense.
Thanks, Ben. Shall we move on to another question? Where should we go? So I suppose, Emma, you maybe I could come to you. There was a question about HMP style. What are the benefits for staff and how does it impact practice?
So the benefits for staff is it allows staff, you know, we have a trauma-informed workforce and we hear the word, you know, trauma-informed, and it's about everything we do, but it's also been trauma responsive, and it's created an environment that allows them trauma responsive conversations and then actions to be taken. The benefits for staff, I'm not in relation to healthcare staff, they, you know, are reaping the benefits of working outside, of feeling as if they're making a difference to patients. The operational staff, I'm not too sure because they do the Goop project. What was the other part of the question? Sorry.
What are the benefits for staff and how does it impact practice?
So impacting practice, it allows us to deliver the care of getting it right first time. It allows patient choice to occur. So, for example, if a patient comes into HMP style, and the statistics show that 90% of women have that depression when they come to style. If you look at the history of that patient, and again, the data available from the Women's Review, from HMPPS, you know, reviews on women's health, you'll see that there's a high history of domestic violence, trauma, sexual abuse, drug use. So if a patient comes in with all that history, of course, you know, the likelihood is absolutely they will have that anxiety, depression. So what it allows is, instead of just offering that medication, it allows choices to build that holistic picture of health. So it's offering practice on a holistic basis. It also works into the tradable medications pathway and the dependence forming medications pathway. So we know within prisons that a lot of the antidepressants, the opiate for medications for pain relief are often utilised. Now, in spectrum prisons, we have the dependence forming medication pathways. So a patient is highlighted HMP style to be on a dependence forming medication pathway, and that may be for musculoskeletal pain. We have a whole process where a case review is held and they may be referred to the physiotherapist or to specialist services to confirm that. But what the social prescribing pathway does is it offers, again, alternatives. So typically the patients would be referred to the physiotherapist who would say, go and do some in-cell activities. Now we've got the opportunity to say, okay, why don't you take part in the 12-week horticulture program to go and do your exercise, to do that in an environment of nature. So the way it benefits patients, it is just phenomenal, really. It gives that choice and the alternative to medication based, but also has shown to decrease the tradable medications that are prescribed within HMP style.
Thanks, Emma. Ben, do you want to tell us how you're going to be measuring or whether you're going to be publishing the outcomes on the Nature Recovery Plan? Are there processes to help other departments to learn from this?
Yes, they are very welcome to get in touch, and I'm more than happy to discuss it at length. As you can imagine, we can geek out quite merrily. It is our intention to publish a form of our nature strategy. Publishing these things is always a challenge. So that is our intention at the moment. We will also be using a portion of our new nature strategy to report against our Welsh biodiversity duty requirements as well. We have, as part of the kind of transition between the two strategies, plans, whatever you want to call them, we have actually looked at the results from our aspirations that are outlined in that plan in terms of delivering ponds in prisons and orchards primarily, but also about how we are managing how our prison operations and construction interact with nature on our estate. So we are doing an exercise in that. How much of that will reach the public domain, I can't tell you at the moment, because it is very difficult to get it out
there. Thank you, Ben. I don't know, Dominique, would this be a question for you? Were you able to quantify the monetary time allocation of green spaces and for prison violence to provide a compelling cost-benefit analysis?
That would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately not. So that wasn't something that we were able to do with the access that we obviously don't have to that kind of internal and I would imagine quite secure data within MOJ and HMPPS, and a bit the next question as well, which is about crime type and if we'd controlled for that. We didn't know. I think there's one of the questions though is about sort of where might efforts be best spent, and something that we could do was have a look at the differential effect of green spaces in different sorts of prison, by which I mean prisons which hold different sorts of people and which had different sorts of function, which was a different way of looking at the information that we did have. And there we found that green spaces had the most beneficial effects where we had prisons that were crowded and prisons that were holding young men and prisons that were holding lots of unsentenced people. Now, there's quite a lot of prisons which would fit a description, kind of one or more than one of those characteristics, but our intention there was, I guess, to address some of those concerns that people have already raised on the call about, for example, the Victorian sites, which are quite tight, they haven't got a huge amount of space. If we have limited opportunity, perhaps to introduce green spaces, even if we use those fantastic ponds, which Bea was talking about and so on, which don't take up stacks of space, but if we have limited opportunity, where might we direct that effort? Where might we make the most difference from these? But of course, that has to be held in tension with the need to expand the estate and perhaps use areas of space where there are some within prisons for different purposes. Of course, this is a very fluid system that's obviously facing quite a few challenges right now. But I guess from our perspective in the research, we were trying to provide as much evidence-based information as we could at that national scale, sort of looking at the robust quant data. But all those questions are really important, and the more analysis that is done here, I suppose, the clearer a picture that we'll get of how these green spaces work and how they can best be used.
Am I okay to just add something to that, Sarah?
Go for it.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept. Dominique, I think you've just described a remand prison when you highlighted those factors found. And I think from a healthcare perspective, we must recognise this is when patients are at their most vulnerable. It's the start of the journey for many, others it's a revolving door, but actually if that's what it's showing, and we've also got PPO themes that are coming out around early days in custody and deaths that are self-inflicted. So the need in remands to look, and I'll keep saying this to everybody that I meet, to look at that purposeful activity and to allow patients to have that mind space, to have that focus on what matters to them is vital. And the reoffending and the rehabilitation element of the HMPPS policies, we have to include horticulture and access to either green space or horticultural activity, because the benefits are there in research, and I think that really needs to be recognised. So it's very interesting to pick out them points that you raised and aligning that with a remand.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I can just come back really, really quick on that. That's great to hear, Emma. And I think one of the questions that we're often asked is kind of, why does green space have these effects? How does it work? And so I'm not a neuroscientist. I can't tell you exactly what's happening inside of the brain, but one of the most compelling theories is about reducing stress. I think if you wanted to describe a really stressful situation, it is being on remand, waiting for trial, waiting for sentencing, not knowing what's going to come next. And as you say, if you're in then a crowded prison which doesn't have very much opportunity for that purposeful activity, I would imagine that's an incredibly stressful position to be in.
Absolutely.
And I think that's perhaps why we see those
and linking it with
and
linking it with PS use, a lot of patients qualitatively report, just in practice, that you'll use that to pass time, to make it go quicker in them early days, for example. So actually, what else can we do to make that time more beneficial, to make it go quicker for the patients? Again, remand prisoners don't have to work. What can we do to really hone in on this pathway? Very interesting. I could talk to you all day, Dominique.
You've kind of half answered another question, because there's another question in the Q&A chat, which is about, what about controlling for crime type? Have you found that different criminals are more likely to be violent in prison? Was this controlled for, and can it be used to make decisions on where best to spend efforts? I think you answered the kind of where to spend efforts, but do you want to say anything about crime type?
So in the study that we did, we didn't have access to that information. And I think it would be quite difficult, I think, to define exactly what we mean by that. So do we mean the index offence for which somebody is being held currently, or do we mean what have they ever done? And this might be two quite different things. The only, I suppose, indication that I can give from the study that we completed is that we also obviously controlled for sort of the type of establishment. So was this a specialist sex offender prison or not? Was this a YOI or not, and so on? And we didn't find any difference there. So that's, I think, the only way in which we were able to control for that sort of thing, but it wasn't a very robust control. Obviously, you can kind of infer certain things. So looking at different sorts of category of prison, these might map broadly onto, you wouldn't be in a Cat A unless you've done fairly serious thing, for example, but it isn't quite an alignment in the way that I think your question intends it. So the answer, unfortunately, is no, we couldn't do that.
Thank you. There's a longer question, which I think is coming your way, Ben. I'll read it out, and then if any of the other panel members want to come in as well, let me know. So many approaches to nature recovery and biodiversity net gain are framed as technical metric-based work, with outcomes often being proposed improved by separation from people footfall disturbance. Does the panel think that this work can really help to support addressing this, for example, as evidence for renewed principles which are based on equitable access to nature and on stewardship? Ben, I think that might be more for you in the kind of balancing that kind of BNG metrics world with actually for nature recovery, access, human beings accessing that space and using that space.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant question, because it kind of really points at the underlying tension between humans and nature. We don't get on well, and it's usually nature that comes out worse. And yet the sort of bitter irony is that we rely on nature and get so much from it. So I think yes, a lot of the kind of like ecology element, particularly where it relates to planning, is very metric, quantitative focused, which is focusing on the ecological element of it. There are other tools, like the BEST tool, and also Natural England have got a great sort of green infrastructure tool as well, about measuring it in a more sort of natural capital flavour, which also accounts for the value that these green spaces bring to people. And yeah, the separation is a difficult one, and ultimately what we are seeking to achieve is a balance between both. We have very sensitive, highly protected, valuable areas which which need to have some sort of controlled level of recreational impact. But we also have people who are desperate for nature, and people don't even know that they're desperate for nature, but they find peace and benefit from it for their own well-being. So in terms of how we use land is really the question which comes into my mind about what the priority is for any given area of land. Is it going to be ecological value, in which case recreation needs to be managed, or is it about the value of the interaction that people are having, in which case recreation should be facilitated and enabled and maximised? So it is a very difficult question. When it applies to the prison environment, I think actually it's almost more clear-cut in a way, because we don't have that the sort of heightened ecological value within the operational area of the prison. So actually that's almost taken away, and actually the biodiversity value is about the people. It's about providing the richest experience for that short space of time that people have an encounter with it, and that's where the value comes from, not about the biodiversity itself, but the fact that you want to see grass with some flowers, with a bee in it or a butterfly as you walk past. We're talking about it at kind of brass tacks level like that. So yeah, it's a great question. Yes, I think it can. And actually, when you're looking at the typical kind of like cohort of people, the backgrounds of people who are incarcerated, actually these people need an introduction to that sort of, facility within their lives, that actually if they realise that going for a walk somewhere helps them deal with whatever it is that they are trying to wrestle with, that little introduction, if that's provided by their interaction with the justice system, then that's given them another tool in the toolbox to help self-manage their own kind of well-being. which I think is, again, it can only be a good thing. So it's very difficult to map out all the permutations of these things, but we have it within our gift to do these small actions, no matter how kind of disproportionately painful they feel, to try and make them happen. That's the opportunity that we have.
And I think it is quite easy when you're not in a prison setting for a long-term stay, just how sterile some of those environments are, and that actually those small moments of interaction with nature become disproportionately important in your life. I think, it is quite surprising when you speak to prisoners how little interaction they've sometimes had throughout the course of their lives. So I fully agree, Ben, with that. Opening up that world to prisoners is a real game changer. I think we're almost at time. There are a couple of questions that we haven't answered. I think we can provide written answers if that's okay. We'll come back to you if you've put a question and we didn't get to answer you. I'm just looking at what the screen's changing. Yes. So I've been asked to provide a few closing remarks. So I suppose I thought the presentations really gave us a range of different perspectives. So we kind of got the more academic perspective, looking at the design of buildings, the design of green space, how we can try and conduct research to find out how the people who live and work in those prisons are affected. We then saw Ben's presentation looking at how the Ministry of Justice is trying to balance a whole series of quite complicated issues. I think we then heard the kind of health work that's going on through Emma's work, and how, the full extent of the power of nature. So it's not just about gardening, but it's about creating environments that help women in the case of Emma, but I think it applies to both the female, male and the youth estate, how it helps people in those situations generate self-worth and give them some hope for often, some of the most traumatized people in our society. I think it is interesting to think about how the Ministry of Justice is this large, complex organisation, but is trying to balance these competing requirements, just as quite a lot of different organisations are actually in our society. So particularly for MOJ, it's that kind of security, protection of the public, as well as the kind of prisoner and staff well-being, the need to expand prisons, comply with a range of environmental laws, and different organisations will have their own slight spin on those things. But actually having to balance all of those requirements is really challenging. But the positive side is that where you've got projects or initiatives or work streams which can deliver multiple benefits across those quite challenging streams, you will tend to have more success at kind of embedding them, getting people to support them. So I think what we've talked about today is that kind of intersection between how access to green space can deliver your health objectives, or some of them. It can deliver the kind of justice objectives. It can deliver the nature recovery and ecological objectives. So I think they were my main takeaways, and I hope that you've all enjoyed the different perspectives today and have got lots of food for thought. I think, Adrian, I'm handing over to you now.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thanks a lot for the great sharing that you did throughout this webinar, navigating through the different questions. And I would also like to, of course, give a big thank you to our speakers. So Dominique, Ben, Emma, and Beatrice, thank you so much for your contributions and for your presentations. Very insightful and super interesting. Ben, you mentioned the BEST tool, which is something that CIRIA had put together a couple of years ago. It is now called CIRIA BEST, and it has indeed an evaluation of health and well-being when choosing to install blue-green infrastructure instead of grey infrastructure. So it is indeed something that might be used as a way of evaluating the benefits qualitative benefits of this type of intervention. So if you want to give it a shot, I will send the link through the follow-up email to that webinar. Now we have on screen a feedback and CPD poll. This form that just popped up does a few things. The first one is if you scroll, it starts with the CPD request and a little bit of feedback on the webinar that you just listened to. So if you want a CPD certificate, this is where you can request one. But also, if you go down to question 4, this is really useful because it gives us an idea of your interest in some of the topics that we are working for within the biodiversity community of practice and within CIRIA as a wider research. So if you are interested in being involved with some of the topics over there, please put it in your response to this poll. I also want to flag that this webinar, which was designed by the Biodiversity Committee of Practice, was designed to be the first in a series. And we wanted to focus on biodiversity, nature, and well-being in different setups, different contexts. And so if this is something of interest for us to focus on, please tick the box in there, and we will find another topics, another setup for which we can have a very interesting conversation around biodiversity and well-being. Okay, so are we moving on to the next slide now, or should we give a bit more time for people to complete it? All right, so while you do the poll, I just want to highlight once again that the Committee of Practice is curating events like this one thanks to their members. So you can see them on screen. Thank you so much for providing the support to allow us to gather this excellent group of speakers and also just to design such a webinar. Thank you for that. We are very much looking forward to 2026 and to bring more biodiversity related events. I think that's pretty much it on our end. So once again, a big thank you to our chair, Sarah, and to our speakers. Fantastic presentations. Any follow-up questions or unanswered questions that you might have, feel free to drop us a line and we will try to respond to those. And with this, I'm going to wish you a great afternoon and I will close the webinar. Thank you so much.